Canola is starting to come up from the ground, and Oklahoma producers may have questions about their canola crop. And we have Josh Bushong here to talk about, well, how does canola look across Oklahoma?
Well, a lot of guys are noticing that they were able to get a stand for the most part. Some guys that kind of did what they did last year were kind of forced in the situation of dusting it in. For 2 years in a row, they've gotten away with that procedure where you barely get the seed covered with soil and the next rain will bring it up. Some guys did try to plant it to moisture, maybe a little deeper than they should have, but once we had some heavy rains, that 3/4 of an inch planting depth might have ended up being a 2 to 2.5 inch planting depth. And we had some heavy rains that crusted some soils over, so we had some emergence issues due to that. Some guys were replanting, but some areas of the state, especially north central and western and southwest Oklahoma, we're starting to see some drought influence on the plant. Just like the wheat that's starting to turn colors, the canola is too. It's just not going to grow very fast until the roots get down to some moisture where you get some rains to alleviate some of those issues. But for the most part, it's still holding on fairly well. One issue that we have seen this year that maybe some new producers haven't seen in the last year or last 2 years is freeze injury or symptoms on the leaves, some yellowing or chlorotic. Sometimes it kind of goes to tan or white, especially soft, fluffy ground that's very dry. It's going to just compound those freeze events. The soil will drop in temperature a little bit quicker than say a heavier soil with moisture in it. So we're seeing more frost symptoms. Most of the fields I've looked at, the plants are still alive. When producers are wanting to know if their plants are still alive or not, they really need to dig up the plant and see if the root's still pliable for one. If it's brittle, it's more than likely dead. But we want that root to be pliable and green all the way up to that crown, that center growing point. As long as that root and that crown are still viable, that plant's still alive. We've seen it in past years where we pretty much lose most all the forage that we produced in the fall throughout the winter, and the plant will put on more leaves in the spring as it comes out of the freezes. So don't worry about it too much. I'd still get out and look out and evaluate your stands. You might have lost some of the smaller plants. We typically like to see at least 4 leaves on it before we get a hard freeze on it, but some fields are worse than others. Like I said, just depends on their condition of their soils in. Might have compounded those freezes we've had the last couple weeks, but most of it seems to be growing out of it.
Okay, and something producers should be thinking about, maybe insects and diseases?
Exactly, especially in a drought year, we really want to stay on top of our weeds and insects. We don't want to stress the plant any more than we need to. So our thresholds for those pests will be lower than typical, especially if you have a thinner or marginal stand where you want to try to retain as many plants as you can. But if you have a nice lush crop such as this one, you can withstand some more insects and stuff like that before you need a spray. But it is very critical, like I said, especially drought years, to get on top of those weeds as soon as you can. I like to see 2 to 3 leaves on the canola before we drive across it with the herbicides. But make sure you get in there in a timely fashion. We might have some more weeds emerge out later in the fall and into the winter, but the main flush that's going to be detrimental to the yield is the weeds that come up with or shortly after the crop. So this first flush of weeds is the most critical to get out in a timely fashion, and most guys will come up with the secondary application early spring to get any of those escapes or any of them that emerged after their first application. So like I said, get that first shot of herbicide on. And a lot of guys, if they're going across with the Roundup, they'll want to look extra hard, see if they have any worms out there, and if they need to, add an insecticide with that herbicide. So get out there and scout, see what kind of threshold you're looking at. Different weeds or weeds and worms are out there. Haven't seen any aphids, but we have seen, just like every year, some diamondback moth larvae, those little green worms across the state, and we have seen some armyworms and some cutworms. So get out there and look around, see if you can see any damage, and spray as soon as you see them, or not as soon as you see them, but as soon as they reach the thresholds for that particular field.
Okay, and just as a side note, the canola looks pretty hardy right now across the state, well, in parts across the state, as compared to the wheat, but that's because it has a taproot.
Being a broadleaf with the taproot, it does have some characteristics that will inhibit to go down a little bit deeper for some water. Grasses like wheat have a fibrous root system. may not be able to get down to some of that subsoil moisture if we have it.
Right.
A lot of our Oklahoma fields are still dry at depths. We've been in a drought for 2-3 years now, so. But if there is moisture down there to be found, if it has some moisture to get it going, that taproot, as long as there's not a hard pan or something like that, it can reach it fairly quickly, like this crop has. This particular field is fairly sandy, so we don't have much topsoil moisture, but it was able to get down fairly quick and get established. So yes, that taproot does help. We've seen in past years, especially down southwest, where we had some fields of canola maybe outproduce some winter wheat because of the drought. But just like always, we're one day closer to rain. Hopefully in the next couple weeks we'll get some rains to get this crop a little bit further in development into some of these harder freezes this winter.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's kind of what we do in Oklahoma is wait on rain. Josh Bushong with Oklahoma State University.